Yeah, my name is Heun. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, professor of psychiatry, psychotherapy, and old age psychiatry. I'm editor of the journal Global Psychiatric Archives, and I'm currently living in Glasgow. And in collaboration with the King Gerorge Unuversity, Lucknow, and the Global Psychiatric Association, I would like to talk about how to write and publish a paper, a hypothesis-based approach. Next. So when we talk today, we talk about different issues, which include motivation, resources, requirement, the message of the paper, the preparation of the paper, different parts of paper, the hypothesis, our writing approach, which is hypothesis-based. And we talk about different types of papers, authorship, submission, if need be, submission, proofreading. And we also talk a little bit about rejection. So next one. So the first thing is, what is your motivation? Why do you want to write a paper? What do you want to achieve? So do you want to inform the world, make an impact, or improve your career? Do you want to move to academic work, or is it a one-off paper? Do you want some fame, or do you want to change services and help patients and improve services in general? So I think that's very important, because sometimes you would have then to publish in different journals and focus on different issues. So the question that you first have also to ask is, what is your workplace? Is it a private practice where you can have different type of patients? You might not have the most severe ones. Is it an outpatients clinic where you have a population sample? Is it a hospital or a general service or specialized hospital? Are you working in management, university? And I think these are the issues which are to be considered. And usually I would recommend that you do what you work in and where your expertise in, because it makes it much easier, and it also helps your career. There's no point, when you work in general practice, to publish a paper about the genetics of a very rare disorder, because you very rarely meet this disorder and you won't have the chance to use genetic tools. So in this respect, you should consider where you work and what you do and focus with the paper on that. Right, so what have you got? Do you have a specific case? Do you have a data set? Do you have an idea or completed study? And what's your interest in research? Do you have ambition? Do you want to write? Do you have the want to write? So in this respect, people have different ideas about that. And it's very important that you think of what you have got. Right, so what you need then is not rocket science, it needs time. And I would always say, if it can be written in a week or 2 weeks, it has already been done. So then the question, if you write a paper, you need resilience. It's quite good to have the help of a secretary, someone who coaches or supervises you. It could be a senior colleague or in the department or in another department. You need access to patients or access to data, access to files, or you possibly will need the support of a statistician unless you're an expert. Right. So the question is, when you tell, before you even start, I would think, what story are you going to tell? So why would you write that? Why would someone want to read it? Is it an interesting approach? Is it very special what you see? Is it new? Why would someone want to read the story? Why would someone want to publish it? Why must know about that? So why must you make the effort to write it? So I think that's something which is very important, and I think something which you can find out before you start. There's no point having the 55th patient who has specific blood problems under a specific medication if it has been published about 50 times already. So you have to look at the literature, what's available, what's already published, and then it helps very much to discuss it with senior researchers or with senior clinicians. They can tell you what's the validity of the story, and you can discuss it with your colleagues. And then if nobody is really interested in that, then you should wonder why you write it and who you write it for. Right, so there's other people who are also involved. So the question is, what others want? Editors, reviewers, publishers. Editors want usually to have something which is meaningful and interesting. People want to read. Reviewers want something which is clear and simple, straightforward, which they can understand. And the publisher wants to have outstanding papers to advise on his or to promote his journal. Right, then you have readers, and I think there are different types of readers, and you should think about that. The occasional readers, and if you want to get their interest, you should think that they might not be immediately interested in what you want. You might have subscribers of the journal, and they might have a general interest in whatever psychiatry or an area where you're coming from. Co-researchers are or often people who read academic papers. So they want to know what's happening, they want to learn from you, and they might be even interested to reproduce your paper. So that's very important, and you should write for co-researchers and future researchers, and you should write for the readers. So usually what people forget, readers don't know everything, they have to be guided. And in this respect, they want to have we call it a red thread or an ongoing idea which goes through the paper. And the future researchers, they want the information to be complete, that they can reproduce your study and make sure that what you found is something which is interesting. Right, so there are different choices of papers. If you have a scientific idea and you have data, then it would be an original paper. If you have a case, it's a case report. Some people, which is very often read well, is reviews or systematic reviews. Systematic reviews have a structured way of getting the data and assessing different papers. Narrative reviews, they can more or less choose, and because they usually or very often found very different results in their reviews. They're not really very attractive. You can have short reports, you can have editorials. You should look then at the journal's author's instructions. You can have rapid communication and letters to the editors. Letters to the editors are a bit different ones, and I again would recommend author's instructions. In some areas, like Global Psychiatric Archives, it's quite a generous way of dealing with that, but in other journals, they don't want opinion papers, they want data, which are very shortly represented. So the paper Lancet publishes more or less scientific data, which are not as comprehensive as other things, but might be and need to be very interesting. So what's the hypothesis approach? Why would you, and this is, I said, you have to have a red thread or a red, an idea which goes through the whole of a line which goes through the whole of the paper. And usually what the introduction is about is developing and stating the hypothesis at the end. So you develop a hypothesis. The methods describe how this hypothesis or question is tested. The results then describe the sample, data collection, and analysis that leads to rejection and support of the hypothesis. The discussion states confirmation, refusal of the hypothesis, and then validates it. Does it make sense? How does it fit with other scientific findings? And what does these findings mean for future research? And the abstract then, which should be at the beginning, gives a 1 to 3 sentence summary of each section structured in objectives, material and methods, results and conclusions. But again, I would refer to the author's instructions of the individual journal. But the whole idea is that what we do is the introduction leads to something, the methods explore this hypothesis, the results describe the sample, what you have done altogether to support or reject the hypothesis, and the discussion talks about the hypothesis and its relevance. Right. So again, I would like to discuss it a bit more in detail. So the introduction leads to the hypothesis paragraph by paragraph. It could be introducing the disease, introducing the concept, introducing genetics or anything, introducing the relevance of the disease or this concept of maybe could be artificial intelligence in whatever anesthesia or psychiatry. Then you have to then find connections between the different items or different subjects, and then you develop and name the hypothesis which should be tested. You could also say, okay, you have a background, you have different issues, 1, 2, 3, and then you should have paragraphs which combine different aspects of the previous issues or subjects together. You develop a hypothesis. At the end, you should name a hypothesis and clarify how you want to investigate these. So a hypothesis would be, for my example, that the specific symptoms in schizophrenia are gender different, and you would investigate it by assessing patients in whatever, in psychiatric hospitals. Yeah. And but so initially, so you have different paragraphs, and then we would talk about patients in schizophrenia, about gender issues, and then you talk about the symptoms, and then you just bind this together and find out how you would like to investigate that. The methods usually describe the sample material, and the methods describe the sample, how are the data and or the patients collected or recruited, what are the controls, which methods do you use, do you have interviews, do you take bloods, how is the data material processed, how is if labs analysis are done, how the interviews are more or less evaluated. Very often I find papers would say, I just take this type of interview and then it has so and so many scores, and but nobody knows how these scores are resulted. And this is very often that people think the reader would know that, but the readers don't know. There might be specialists and they know that, but then they might not even want to read your paper. So then you have to also explain, why are your methods valid? The question might be, why is it valid that you count the cars which pass a specific place to have an indicator of the air quality? So that might be something, instead of just, you can't measure air quality, but you could easily measure the number of cars which pass somewhere. So this is, these are substitute measures, but you have to explain why these methods are valid. Then very often you have to think about, in your methods, can an independent researcher reproduce your data or your study? And the question is, does the reader have sufficient data to be convinced that you did the right thing? And the question you can also ask yourself, what did you do to assess your study hypothesis? Right. So the material and methods would also go again and say, what and where was the hypothesis tested, in which sample, with which instruments and which outcome, how were these methods applied, and how were the data analyzed? And the most important, how does the analysis validate or falsify the hypothesis? So, and what I find very often, that things are not matching up. Right, so the results are usually started with the main findings, individual results, hypothesis by hypothesis, then results that provide evidence for the quality of the data. Then you have additional results, and then you have unexpected results. There's no point. So usually you start with the general to the specific. So the results usually are description of the sample or the environment, description of the data analysis step by step, and usually you should say which hypothesis and which statistic analysis fit together, a description of the main results and the relation to the hypothesis, and whether the hypothesis has been falsified or the question has been falsified. Right, so the discussion is usually very structured as well. At least if you use a hypothesis-based approach, you reiterate the main findings, hypothesis by hypothesis. You compared what other authors have found. Are these your findings consistent with others, or do you have differences? And if so, why are these differences there? If you say, okay, you talk about the validity of the results, so then you could say whatever the number of cars, that whatever they lead to more mental health problems, that would fit with other studies where you have industry lots of industry, and people have more have more health problems. So the question is, do your results match with other results which have either the same or different methods? So are your methods valid? So how you compare your methods with other methods? And then it's very important to talk about the general and specific meaning of the results. You should then talk about study limitations, and the question is, in the conclusions, what's the take-home message? What can we do with the finding, and what are specific recommendations for future? Could be for research. There's no point making a study and then saying, okay, we have a study about the mental health of people under whatever in specific polluted areas, and then by the results you come out of this. The conclusion is you should have more studies in this area. I think it should be more specific in saying, I learned this, and some other studies should move forward from this place. So use your own stuff. So the discussion states the confirmation or refusal of the hypothesis, validates the hypothesis, how it fits with other publication or researchers, what it means in specific in general, where are the limitations of the analysis, and how can this validation or falsification of the hypothesis be used for future research and testing other hypotheses or similar hypotheses. Right, the abstract usually, and I mentioned this before, gives usually 1 to 3 sentences of each section structured in objectives, materials, methods, results, and conclusions. The objective develop and state the hypothesis at the end. Methods describe how the hypothesis is tested. Results, again, describe the data collection and analysis that lead to rejection or support of the hypothesis. And the conclusion states with the confirmation, refusal of the hypothesis, and validates it. Explore the practical or future relevance of the findings. Okay, so you could simply say, and this might be another simple option, you can also read it up in the paper we published in Global Psychiatry Archives. Initially, it was called Global Psychiatry, but they usually, the introduction leads to the question and what's the relevance of the question. Methods are how you answer this question. The results are what's the answer to the question, and the relevance of the answer, that's what you discuss later. That's a discussion. Right, so I was talking a little bit about the original papers, but there are guidance for other types of papers, and there are types for letters for the editor. Lancet is very famous for that, or Nature papers are using letters to the editor very much. Case reports, there are this J. Biggs Institute, which give you advice on how to do a proper case report. Systematic reviews, there are Prisma, Amstar, or also J. Briggs Institute guidelines, and I think I recommend that. We in Global Psychiatry have editorials and global perspectives, and if you really want to publish anything with us, check and adhere to the author's instructions. The most frustrating part for us, for an editor, is when you have to, first, before you look at anything, look through the author's instructions and how badly sometimes they are adhered to. Right, these are more systematic and very much systematic recommendations. This is from Prisma. So they have very clear things. They have an abstract, they refer to summaries, background, objective, study appraisal. The introduction describes the rationale for the review. If you have a systematic review, then you provide explicit statements of the questions, which I call then hypothesis. You could also mention all the PICOS criteria, which is patients, intervention, controls, and outcome, and other methods are very, very much systematic. So it refers to the registration of the protocol, eligibility criteria for people or for studies in this case, information sources, how was the study search done, how were studies selected, how were data collected out of papers, what were the different data items, what were the data, the bias, and how were results synthesized, so how were results And this is very often a bit of a problem in systematic reviews, what you read, that people just have a nice table and then talk about individual papers, and there's no synthesis in that. Risk of bias you should assess, and you have to sometimes additional analysis, subgroup analysis, or maybe you come into gender questions, which then are secondary investigated, and you should tell how it's done. So the results are in systematic reviews, usually very much systematically recommended, and I think I wouldn't want to go in further details. Just say, if you want to write a systematic review, keep it with Prisma, AMSTA, or the JBRICS Institute. Okay, so then I would ask myself, who is the author? That can be a bit of a contentious issue, and authors should be not. There's one thing which shouldn't be here in this list. It's just to wake you people up and have a look at that. Yes, people should have, authors should be involved in the development of the study, drafting papers, writing the papers, providing information or providing data, provision of samples, data analysis, correction and proofreading. And sponsorship by itself, that's the one which stands out, shouldn't be a reason to grant authorship. However, you should mention this in the acknowledgement, in the declarations. Right, where you submit a paper, that's interesting because, we discussed before what do you have, what you publish on. So if it's something which is of national interest or regional interest, then you go for a regional journal. If it's something which interests the world or might interest the world, then you go for an international journal. Then some journals are very subject-specific, like a journal of suicide research or anxiety research, and other are more general. It's also important to look at what the objectives are, what you want to achieve. If you want to be seen by your local colleagues, then it's much better to go for a regional journal than an international one. So the question is, who's your readership? The other thing is the impact of the journal. It helps to be realistic about what you have and knowing whether it's something which is absolutely new, never been heard of, or whether it's a study which has something already previous stuff is known about that. So you have to be a bit more, show some humility about where you can achieve. So yes, we all want to publish in the World Psychiatry, but that's not realistic. And the question is, what can you achieve and where might people be interested? Well, when I was a bit younger, we published quite a few papers, and sometimes we also look what was the previous content. So sometimes it's quite nice when people cite previous studies. And if a journal is interested in specific things, or the editor, then it's good to do something. However, if you do a paper and the research which already has been treated 4 times in this journal, then they might reject it simply because it's not interesting anymore. Right. So if you submit a paper, make sure you complete all parts of the paper, which include a cover page with authors and affiliations, abstract, introduction, material and methods, results, discussion, references. Don't forget the acknowledgement and the declaration of interest and other declarations. And I would really, as an editor, you're really frustrated very often that people do not look the author's instructions because they mention all this stuff quite carefully. Right. Before you submit, check again what are the author's instructions. Have a nice friendly letter to the editor, why you want it published with their journal. Look at the format of your paper and the letter to the editor. Check whether forms are needed. Check with the agreement by your co-authors, and make sure that all the declarations are in the paper or in the forms as indicated by the journal's author's instruction. So then you have to click. Usually you can, previously we had to send papers straight to the author, to the editors, and sometimes you had to have several copies. So usually you stood on the copier quite a while to have whatever 4 or 5 copies of the papers, which they then send to reviewers. Now we usually click, wait, and then see. The different options: acceptance, minor revision, major revision, or rejection. So usually it's, or let's say it's not very common that papers are fully easily accepted. Usually you have minor revisions, major revisions, or rejection. And so the question is, what do you do when you get that? We might just start with the most nasty one and look at what are the reasons for rejection. So the reasons for rejection are often that what you present or what has been written is not really new. It's something which has been maybe published in several other papers, but not in a paper, in this paper. Or some research has been done in 15 Asian countries, and now you want to say it hasn't been published in the 16th Asian country. So that's something what we call a bit Me Too papers. Sometimes people have done things and they're irrelevant or have no major scientific interest. What's very often doesn't go down well with editors is if there's no evidence and just opinion. Some papers very often don't go to get to the point. They're unfocused. Then it's difficult to understand what people come with. Some papers seem to assume that the readers can make his own conclusions. However, I would say you have to guide the reader, and this is something what people very often don't understand. They think if people want to understand a table, they must have found previous information which relate to the table on page 1, 9, and 24 of the paper, which not realistic. So I would usually say that tables should be understood on its own. Unclear methods or poor and too much statistics, which has nothing to do with the study question. I would say too much clutter, too much irrelevant stuff. Sometimes the tables are not understandable. And what is a very common problem that the introduction, the methods, results, and discussion do not align. In this respect, do not follow a hypothesis or question-based approach. And very often the discussion doesn't focus on the results. In the results in a systematic review is not the individual papers. It is more or less the synthesis of the different papers. And then very often the conclusions are not substantiated. So people then come up with, they measure the whatever burnout in a specific area. And the conclusions is now that people should have some more psychotherapy, more support, more counseling, or anything. But this is then something which might or might not have been addressed in the paper. Right. How to deal with rejection? So the question is, what's next? So what people very often do for quite a while, do nothing and get depressed. So I think this is the end. I think it would be much better people accept what's in there, accept the fact, and deal with the critique. You can complain if you really are right. That's not usually very common. I've done this. I complained once about a paper what I did about dementia and transcranial Doppler. And it seemed that the reviewer absolutely had no clue. And then I said, oh, sorry for that, but maybe I haven't explained it well, but this is the result. And then the editor changed her mind in this case. So the question is trying to understand the problems. What is it, what you've done, what's not understood, try to improve, and usually you can resubmit. If you can't resubmit to this journal because they close the doors and say it's not irrelevant, you try another paper, another journal, and then usually it should be fine if you learn from that and if you have a decent approach. If you have been accepted, and the paper is possible for revision, then check the editor's decision. Explain for the editor why you see something this way or the other way. Check the reviews carefully. And that's something I would really appreciate. Prepare a response to the editor. prepare a response to the reviewer and do it point by point. It doesn't help to say, oh, we have just, we accepted your nice comments and we answered them accordingly. So that makes it very difficult for the editors and or reviewers. They like to look through this and say, okay, this was my concern. They have addressed this concern, and I'm happy with this, or we can discuss it again. But usually, if you guide the reviewers question one by one, then you don't forget things, and it will be much easier for the reviewer and then the editor to accept the paper. So I would do this point by point. People sometimes come up with the idea that they say, yeah, but I meant this. So then they answer this to the reviewer, but they don't transfer these changes into the paper. So that's essential to do that. Sometimes it might be that if the critique is there, that you have to rewrite other parts of the paper. So let's say that way, you had a paper where gender differences were relevant and you assume that, but looking at the statistics, it doesn't make sense. So you have to look at the literature and rewrite the paper, because then if there's no gender difference, it might be less interesting. And, so sometimes you have to shorten the text, which refers to something. Right. Take it serious, and if you don't take it serious and you annoy the editor, then it will be a late rejection, and it can happen when people don't or make it too difficult for the editor and the reviewer to move forward. Right, proofreading. That's another contentious issue. It's a last chance, no correction possible for the next century. The paper will then look as you have finished. Any mistake will be your fault. These might be, they usually, after you made these changes, sometimes the editor or come back to questions, but then if you need to do anything, so that sometimes the language editor will look at that. So you have to clarify your corrections. And I think this is sometimes where people do not respond properly. The other thing is what people forget, that the printer or the typesetter has no clue what you're talking about. So you have to tell them this in this line, that's standing there. In this line, you want to have this and this. So what's there? What's the change? And because printers, they've worked for a publisher, and they probably publish papers in about anesthesia, about languages, about history, and so on. So you have to consider that the printer who finally makes these changes, the proofreading papers, has no clue about what you are talking about. So you have to be very clear about that. Right. Another contentious issue is artificial intelligence, how you use support software. Can you use literature management software? And I would say for the latter two, certainly can have support software. We recently had a paper which was more or less completely written by artificial intelligence, and you can see this. It's at the moment they're not really that good. So I think sometimes the papers are, let's say, writing a hypothesis-based approach and trying to be short, concise, and clear sometimes doesn't work. And what you realize when people have used artificial intelligence, that they sometimes repeat something from the introduction to the discussion and don't provide any evidence, or they focus something about something burnout in general, which might be interesting, which they found somewhere on the internet. So I would say be very, very careful if you use artificial intelligence. And I would say possibly you should make sure that after you use this, that it would be corrected and you can 100% be the author. And I can understand that people from countries which are not English speaking try to use that, but it's very, very important that the data presentation, that's much more important than the language quality, because that can be amended by the language editor but the clarity of the presentation can't be changed by artificial intelligence. I think you have to check the author's instructions. And the other thing is, be honest, declare this, what you have used, declare it in the methods. And the other thing is, some of this stuff usually ends up not in whatever, if you have, let's say, literature management software, we can't use it or we can't transfer it to a paper. And what we have to have from the authors is more or less a Word file, and this will then be transferred to a PDF or HTML file. So finally, it just burns down to the fact that we're not, so let's say scientific journals are not more or less apps. Yeah, at the moment they're not, maybe in the future, but at the moment, the end of something is a PDF and an HTML file. Right. So what's a final take-home message? If you're still full of ambition and drive, you can talk to us, and you have the resilience. And if you want to consider joining the Global Psychiatric Association or reading the journals, in the next page you find the links. So if you want to submit to the journal, there's a link. And if you want to join the Global Psychiatric Association, there's a link as well. I'm very grateful for your interest, and I would like to thank you, and I would like to make sure that you are, ask the questions you think which are important to you. And I'm trying to finish the recording. Thanks. All right, that's it. And I stop the recording.